I just watched the police drag my brother-in-law out of my living room in handcuffs. And now my husband is pounding on the locked front door, screaming that I am a thief who stole his inheritance. I am sitting here in the dark, clutching a bank statement worth $2 million, wondering if I am the hero of this story or the villain who just destroyed an entire family. My name is Jade, and 3 months ago, these people convinced me to quit my nursing job to care for their dying parents in exchange for a fair share of the estate. But it was all a lie. They treated me like an unpaid servant, made me scrub floors while they secretly sold the house, and plotted to leave me with nothing but debt. They did not know I found the secret will hidden in the basement. They did not know I was recording their cruelty every single day. Now, I have taken everything from them: the house, the money, and their freedom. My heart is pounding out of my chest because the silence in this big, empty house is terrifying. I did what I had to do to survive their abuse. But looking at the wreckage of my life, I feel like I cannot breathe. Please tell me, was I wrong to take the money and execute this revenge? Or did they deserve every bit of this karma? My name is Jade. I am 32 years old, and on paper, I am living the American dream. I reside in a 4-bedroom colonial in a manicured subdivision of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, where the grass is cut with laser precision by landscaping crews every Tuesday morning, and the Homeowners Association sends you a warning letter if your garbage bins are left out past 6 in the evening. Before this, I was a battlefield commander in Scrubs. I spent 7 years as an emergency room nurse at a level 1 trauma center in Philadelphia. I was addicted to the chaos, the adrenaline, the smell of antiseptic and copper blood. I knew how to triage a gunshot wound in 30 seconds and how to calm a meth addict with nothing but my voice. But now my biggest emergency is making sure the roast chicken does not dry out before my husband, Mark, gets home. I looked down at my hands as they rested on the cold, speckled granite of the kitchen island. These hands used to save lives. Now they were trembling, not from the stress of a code blue, but from the notification that had just flashed across my iPhone screen. It was a payment reminder from Visa, $11,000. I swiped the notification away quickly, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. That debt was my little secret. It was the price of boredom. It was the cost of trying to fill the silence of this empty, echoing house with designer shoes I had nowhere to wear, and expensive throw pillows that Mark would eventually toss on the floor. Mark thought we were comfortable. He thought his job as a mid-level logistics manager paid for everything. He did not know that I was slowly drowning us in credit card interest just to feel something other than numbness. The front door opened, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps. Mark was home, and he was not alone. I took a deep breath, fixing a smile onto my face like a mask. It was a skill I had perfected in the hospital waiting room when delivering bad news to families. "Honey, we are here," Mark called out. His voice had that forced cheerfulness that always set my teeth on edge. It was the tone of a man trying to sell a used car with a leaking transmission. Walking into the kitchen behind him were his brothers, Henry and Frank, my brothers-in-law. Henry was the oldest, a man who wore suits that were slightly too tight to hide his expanding gut, driving a leased Mercedes E-Class that he could barely afford to insure. Frank was the middle child, a follower who mimicked everything Henry did, right down to the fake Rolex on his wrist. They were loud, they were entitled, and they smelled like cheap cologne and entitlement. "Hey, Jade," Henry boomed, bypassing any social pleasantries to walk straight to my fridge. He opened it without asking. scanning the contents like he was a health inspector, still buying the organic stuff. Huh? Must be nice to burn money on fancy lettuce when you do not actually earn a paycheck. I felt a sharp prick of irritation, but I kept my voice level. It is good to see you too. Henry, dinner is almost ready. Frank leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. He looked around the kitchen, his eyes assessing the appliances, the decor, calculating the value of everything in the room. You guys really have it made here. Mom was saying just yesterday how big this place is for 2 people. Kind of a waste. If you ask me, there it was, the first jab. I turned back to the oven to hide the roll of my eyes. My mother-in-law, Daisy, had never liked me. To her, I was just a nurse from a blue-collar family who had somehow trapped her precious baby boy. The fact that she was currently suffering from the early stages of dementia had not softened her edges. It had only stripped away her filter. "Why are you guys here so early?" I asked, pulling the roasting pan out. The heat hit my face. A welcome distraction. "I thought we said 7. Mark stepped in, pouring wine into 3 glasses. He did not pour one for me. "We just wanted to catch up." "Jade, it has been a while since the 3 brothers were together. Do not be so uptight." Uptight, that was their favorite word for me. When I refused to let them smoke cigars in my living room, I was uptight. When I asked them to take their shoes off on the cream-colored carpet, I was uptight. We moved to the dining room. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with things left unsaid. I watched them eat. Henry chewed with his mouth open, a habit that made me nauseous. Frank ate quickly, like someone was going to take the plate away. Mark just picked at his food, his eyes darting between his brothers like a nervous prey animal. So, Henry started, wiping grease from his lip with the cloth napkin I had spent an hour ironing. "We need to talk about Mom and Dad." My stomach dropped. I knew this tone. This was not a casual conversation. This was a pitch. Dad had a stroke 2 months ago. He was bedridden, paralyzed on his left side. Daisy was losing her memory and her temper in equal measure. Up until now, they had been living in their old ranch house 40 minutes away, with a neighbor checking in on them. "What about them?" I asked, gripping my fork tight enough to turn my knuckles white. "They cannot stay there alone anymore," Frank said, finally looking me in the eye. His gaze was cold, flat. "It is dangerous. Mom left the stove on last week. Almost burned the whole place down. We looked into nursing homes," Henry added, taking a large gulp of wine. "But my God, have you seen the prices? $10,000 a month for a place that smells like urine and boiled cabbage. We cannot do that to them. They deserve family." I put my fork down. The metal clattered against the china, the sound echoing in the silence. "So, what are you suggesting, Henry? You live in a 2-bedroom apartment with your girlfriend. Frank lives in a condo that does not even allow pets, let alone geriatric patients." Henry smiled. It was a predatory smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Exactly. That is the problem. We just do not have the space. But look at this place. Jade. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard." I looked at Mark. He was staring intently at his mashed potatoes, refusing to meet my gaze. That was the moment I knew. This was not a discussion. This was an ambush. They had rehearsed this. Mark had known they were coming to say this. And he had not warned me. "You want them to move in here," I said. "It was not a question. It makes the most sense," Frank said, shrugging as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. "Plus, you are a nurse. Jade, You have the training. You know how to change catheters and handle the medications. It is perfect. I am not a nurse anymore, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I retired. I am a wife. I am not a caregiver for hire. Oh, come on. Henry laughed. A dismissive, barking sound. You do not have a job. Jade, you sit here all day. What else are you doing with your time? Shopping? Watching television? It is not like you are contributing financially to this marriage right now. Mark is carrying the whole load. The least you can do is help out with the family. The insult landed like a physical slap. I looked at Mark again, begging him silently to defend me, to say that managing a household was work, that my mental health mattered, that I was his wife, not his employee. Mark finally looked up. His eyes were watery. Weak. Jade. Sayu Tsing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than honey. Sayu Tsing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than it would save us so much money. And the brothers, Sayu Tsing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than they said if we do this. If we take care of mom and dad, Sayu Tsing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than when the time comes to sell their house. They will give us a bigger cut. Sayu Tsing Hao Ling. 2 Raute ist größer als I froze. Sayu Tsing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than money. It always came down to money. Henry leaned forward, sensing my hesitation. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Think about it, Jade. That house of theirs sits on 2 acres. It is worth $1 million in this market easily. You take them in. You save the family 10 grand a month in nursing home fees. And when they pass, Sayu Tsing Hao Ling, 2 hash is greater than we make it worth your while. We take care of family. I looked at the 3 men sitting around my dining table. Henry, the bully, Frank, the leech, and Mark, the coward. My mind flashed to my credit card statement. $11,000, and the interest was compounding daily. If I took this on, I could demand control of the household finances. I could siphon off enough from the stipend they would surely have to provide for food and supplies to pay off my secret debt. I looked at Henry. I saw the arrogance in his eyes. He thought he had trapped me. He thought I was just a submissive housewife who would fold under pressure because I had no leverage. He had no idea that I spent 7 years watching people lie to me in the emergency room. I knew when someone was hiding something. There was a twitch in Henry's left eye, a bead of sweat on Frank's upper lip. They were desperate. They needed this more than I did. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The liquid was bitter, just like the taste in my mouth. If I do this, I said, my voice steady, cold, and professional. I have conditions. Henry grinned, raising his glass. Anything for family, Jade. Anything for family. But as our glasses clinked, I did not hear the sound of celebration. I heard the sound of a cage door slamming shut, and I had a sinking feeling that I was not the only one trapped inside. The silence in the dining room was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom right before a verdict is read. Henry leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight, a smug satisfaction plastered across his face. He thought the conversation was over. He thought the deal was done just because he had offered a vague promise of future money. But I was not nodding. I stood up, picking up the empty wine bottle. The glass felt cool and solid in my hand. A grounding weight. I walked to the kitchen, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Mark followed me, his footsteps soft and hesitant. I could feel his anxiety radiating off him like heat from a pavement in August. Jade, he whispered, grabbing my elbow as soon as we were out of earshot. "What are you doing? Just agree with them. It is the only way." I spun around, pulling my arm away. "The only way? Mark, do you have amnesia? Do you remember our wedding day? Do you remember what your mother said to me in the receiving line?" Mark looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "She was drunk. Jade. That was 5 years ago. She called me white trash." I hissed, keeping my voice low but lacing it with venom. "She told me that I was a gold digger who trapped you because I wanted to upgrade my zip code. She said my nursing scrubs were the only uniform I was fit to wear. And now you want me to wipe her bottom and spoon-feed her oatmeal?" Mark Sihil. A long, defeated sound. He looked like a child who had been scolded. "She is sick. Jade. She has dementia. She does not remember any of that." "But I do," I said, pointing a finger at my own chest. "I remember every word." We walked back into the dining room. Henry and Frank were whispering to each other, but they stopped abruptly when we entered. Their eyes tracked me. Assessing, calculating. "I am not doing it," I said. The air left the room. Henry's smile dropped. Frank frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Excuse me?" Henry asked, his voice losing its fake warmth. I said, "No, I am not a servant. I am not a facility. If Mom and Dad need care, you can hire a home health aide. You can pool your money, but I am not turning my home into a hospice because you two are too cheap to pay for professionals." Henry stood up slowly. He was taller than Mark, broader. He used his size to intimidate, a tactic I had seen 1,000 times with aggressive patients in the emergency room. "You are being selfish, Jade," Henry said, his voice deep and vibrating with controlled anger. "This is family. We make sacrifices for family, but I guess you would not understand that. You do not come from a family like ours. You come from Saoyuting Hao Ling. 2 hashes greater than well. Let us not go there." There it was again, the subtle dig at my background, the reminder that I was an outsider. Frank pulled out his phone. "You know, Jade, people are going to talk. The neighbors, the church. Everyone knows Mom and Dad are in bad shape. If they find out you refuse to take them in, Saoyuting Hao Ling, 2 hashes greater than well, it is not going to look good for you. Or for Mark." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It is just reality," Frank said, shrugging. They left 10 minutes later. The door slammed shut, shaking the frame. Mark did not say a word to me. He just went upstairs and closed the bedroom door. I slept in the guest room that night. The next morning, the war began. I was drinking coffee, scrolling through my phone, when a notification popped up from Facebook. It was a post from Henry. He had tagged Mark, Frank, and several of our cousins. The photo was of Daisy, looking frail and confused in a hospital bed. A picture from her last admission. The caption read, "Heartbroken to see Mom like this. It is sad when our elders are seen as burdens rather than blessings. Some people care more about their lifestyle than their duty." Praying for a solution, my chest tightened. He did not name me, but he did not have to. The comments were already flooding in. "So sad. Henry, stay strong. Who would abandon their parents? Disgusting. Family comes first. Always." I felt the walls of my perfectly curated suburban life closing in. In this town, reputation was currency. If I became known as the heartless daughter-in-law who let her husband's parents rot, the whispers at the grocery store would be unbearable. The invitations to neighborhood block parties would stop. I would be a pariah, I heard Mark coming down the stairs. He walked into the kitchen, looking haggard. He had seen the post. "Jade, please," he said, his voice cracking. "Henry is not going to stop. He will turn the whole family against us. He will cut me out of the will. He is the executor. Jade, if he wants to, he can make sure we get nothing when they die." Nothing. I looked at my husband. I saw a man who was terrified of his older brother, a man who was terrified of poverty, and for the first time, I realized how much I despised his weakness. But then, my mind clicked over to the other reality. My reality. I opened my banking application under the table. The red numbers glared back at me. $11,000. And another bill coming for the property taxes. Mark did not have the cash flow to cover it all. We were living paycheck to paycheck on his salary, masquerading as wealthy. If Henry cut us out, if we lost the inheritance, this house of cards would collapse. I would be back in a studio apartment, scrubbing floors, divorced and broke. I took a sip of coffee. It was cold. "Tell them to come over," I said. Mark blinked. "What?" "Tell Henry and Frank to come over tonight. We will work something out." Mark exhaled, his shoulders sagging in relief. He rushed to me, trying to hug me, but I stiffened. "Thank you, Jade. Thank you. You are doing the right thing. I am not doing it for you." I thought that evening, the brothers returned. The atmosphere was different. They knew they had won. They walked in with a swagger, the victorious generals accepting a surrender. We sat in the living room this time. I sat in the single armchair, creating a physical distance between myself and the three men on the sofa. "Okay," I said, crossing my legs. "I will do it. Mom and Dad can move in." Henry grinned, spreading his arms wide. "See? I knew you had a heart in there somewhere, Jade." "But," I cut in, raising a hand. "There are conditions." Frank rolled his eyes. "Here we go. First, I want a monthly stipend for expenses, $2,000 a month, cash, handed to me on the first of every month. Taking care of 2 adults is expensive. Food, diapers, medical supplies, higher utility bills. I am not paying for that out of our household budget." Henry frowned. $2,000? That seems steep. Compare it to a nursing home, I said sharply. 10,000 or 2,000. Do the math. Henry, you are a businessman. Are you not? He paused, calculating. Fine, 2,000. Anything else? Yes. I looked at Mark, then back at Henry. I wanted in writing that when the house is sold, Mark gets 40% of the proceeds, not a 3-way split. 40%, because we are the ones doing the work. The room went silent. Frank looked at Henry. This was the sticking point. This was their inheritance I was carving up. 35? Henry countered. 40, I said, not blinking. Or you can take them to your condo. Frank, I hear the pull-out couch is comfortable. Henry clenched his jaw. I could see the vein pulsing in his temple. He hated me in that moment. He hated that I had found a spine. He hated that I was negotiating. Fine, he spat out. 40%, but you take care of everything. Doctor appointments, hygiene, meals, night shifts. We do not want to hear any complaining. You are the nurse. This is your job now. It is a deal, I said. I did not shake their hands. I did not offer them a drink. I watched them leave, feeling a strange mixture of nausea and triumph. I had sold my freedom. I had agreed to let the woman who abused me live in my house. I had agreed to wipe the drool from the chin of a man who had never spoken a kind word to me. But as I walked back to the kitchen and looked at the stack of unpaid bills hidden in the junk drawer, I knew I had no choice. I was not a saint. I was not a martyr. I was a woman who needed money, and I had just signed a contract with the devil to get it. The first crack in the foundation had appeared. I just did not know yet that the whole house was destined to crumble. The invasion began on a Tuesday morning, heralded not by trumpets, but by the screeching of worn brakes from a private medical transport van. It was a gray, drizzle-soaked day in New Jersey, the kind of weather that made the suburbs look less like a sanctuary and more like a prison yard with better landscaping. I stood on the front porch, my arms crossed tightly over my chest to ward off the chill, watching two bored-looking emergency medical technicians unload the stretcher. My father-in-law, Thomas, was a dead weight, a heap of blankets and paralysis. His face was slack, the left side drooping like melted wax, his eyes darting around with the frantic confusion of a trapped animal. Behind him, my mother-in-law, Daisy, was being guided down the ramp by the driver. She was clutching a plastic bag filled with pill bottles as if it were a purse of diamonds. "Where are we going?" she screeched, her voice cutting through the humid air. "This is not my house. Take me home. I want to go home." Mark stood next to me, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He looked useless. He looked like a man watching a car accident he had caused but had no idea how to fix. "Just go help her, Mark," I snapped, my patience already fraying like an old rope. As they wheeled Thomas into my foyer, the wheels of the stretcher left muddy tracks on the hardwood floors I had polished yesterday. I felt a physical twinge in my chest, a tightening. This was it. My sanctuary was gone. Henry and Frank arrived 20 minutes later, not to help with the heavy lifting, but to supervise. They walked in with coffee cups from Starbucks, not offering one to me or Mark. "Place looks good," Henry said, looking around the living room where we had cleared space for a hospital bed. "A bit crowded now, but hey, it is cozy." I walked straight up to him. I did not offer him a coat hanger. I did not offer him a seat. "The money," I said. Henry blinked, feigning ignorance. "Excuse me?" "The stipend." "Henry, $2,000. Today is move-in day. We agreed on cash up front for the first month. I have a grocery list a mile long. I need to buy a shower chair, adult diapers, barrier cream, and thickening powder for your father's water. That stuff is not free." Henry laughed, a dismissive chuckle that grated on my nerves. "Wow, Jade, they have not even taken their coats off yet, and you are shaking me down? Relax. I do not have that much cash on me right now. I will transfer it to Mark later this week, or I will bring it by next Sunday." "No," I said, stepping into his personal space. "The deal was the first of the month. I am not running a charity here. Henry, if you do not have the money, go to the automated teller machine." Frank stepped in, placing a hand on Henry's shoulder as if to hold him back, though the aggression was entirely projected onto me. "Jesus, Jade," Frank sneered, "you are acting like a mercenary. Our parents are sick. Can we focus on getting them settled before we talk about your paycheck? Have some class." Mark, standing by the stairs, looked at the floor. He said nothing. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I swallowed it down. "Fine, but if I do not see that money by Friday, I am dropping them off at your condo, Frank, and I will leave them in the lobby." I turned my back on them and went to work. For the next 5 days, I ceased to be a person. I became a machine. My world shrank to the four walls of the house and the bodily functions of two people who resented my existence. The smell hit me first. No matter how much bleach I used, no matter how many scented candles I burned, the house began to smell. It was a cloying, sweet, sick odor of old skin, urina, and medicinal ointment. It seeped into the curtains. It clung to my hair. Daisy was a nightmare. Her dementia was not the quiet, forgetful kind. It was the angry, paranoid kind. She followed me from room to room, accusing me of stealing her jewelry, which Henry had actually taken for safekeeping weeks ago. "You are the maid." She would spit at me as I tried to feed her soup. "You are the help. Do not look at me." I gritted my teeth. I changed Thomas's catheter bag. I crushed pills into applesauce. I woke up every 2 hours to turn Thomas so he would not get bed sores, using the leverage techniques I had learned in the trauma unit. My back ached. My hands were raw from washing them 50 times a day. Mark was a ghost. He started working late every single night. Sudden projects, emergency meetings. He would come home at 9 o'clock, smelling of bar nuts and draft beer, kiss me on the cheek, and say, "You are an angel, Jade," before passing out in bed while I stayed up washing soiled sheets. By Monday of the second week, the money still had not arrived. I was in the kitchen, furiously scrubbing a pot, when the mailman knocked. It was a certified letter, requiring a signature. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to the door. "Sign here." The postman said, "Bored." I signed. The envelope was thick. It was addressed to Thomas and Daisy, but it had a yellow forwarding sticker on it, redirecting it to our address. It was from a title company in town. I frowned. Why would my in-laws be getting mail from a title company? I knew I should not open it. It was a federal offense to open someone else's mail. But then I remembered the smell of urine in my living room. I remembered the $11,000 on my credit card. I remembered Henry's smirk. I tore the envelope open. Inside was a stack of documents. I flipped through them, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. Closing, disclosure, settlement statement, wire transfer instructions. My breath hitched. I stopped on the second page. Property address, 14 Maplewood Drive. Status, pending sale. Closing date, November 15th. I froze. November 15th was 3 days ago. I flipped to the signature page. There were shaky signatures that looked like Thomas and Daisy's, but they were too neat, too controlled. And below them, witnessing the signatures, was Henry. They had sold the house that was supposed to be our inheritance, the house that Henry and Frank had promised would be sold later, with 40% of the proceeds going to us for my labor. They had already sold it. I ran to the kitchen counter where my laptop sat. My fingers trembled as I typed in the address on Zillow. The page loaded. A banner across the photo of the ranch house screamed in bright red letters. Sold. Sold for $950,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. I grabbed my phone and dialed Henry. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed again. Voicemail. I dialed Frank. Voicemail. They were screening me. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my chest. If the house was sold 3 days ago, where was the money? Where was the check? I logged into our joint bank account with Mark. Maybe the money had been transferred there. Maybe Mark had surprised me. The screen refreshed. Balance, $412. I stared at the number. That was impossible. We usually kept at least $5,000 in the checking account for bills. I clicked on transaction history. There, at the top of the list, dated 4 days ago, the day before the closing date on the house, was a withdrawal, outgoing wire transfer, $5,000. Recipient, Henry Miller. Memo, staging and cleaning fees. The world tilted on its axis. I grabbed the granite countertop to keep from falling. Saotsing howling. 2. Mark. Mark had sent Henry $5,000 of our own money. Money we did not have. Money we needed for the mortgage. Saotsing howling. 2 hash is greater than Y. Staging and cleaning fees. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the gut, doubling me over. Henry had convinced Mark that they needed money to spruce up the parents' house to get it ready for sale. Mark, gullible and desperate to please his big brother, had drained our account to help them sell the very asset they were stealing from us. They had sold the house. They had pocketed nearly $1 million. They had dumped the parents on me to avoid nursing home fees. And they had even tricked my husband into paying for the privilege. I was not a partner in this arrangement. I was not a beneficiary. I was the help, I was the servant, and I was doing it all for free. A sound from the living room broke through the ringing in my ears. It was the sound of glass shattering. I ran into the room. Daisy was standing over the remains of a crystal vase, one of the few nice things I had bought for myself years ago. She was smiling. Acrel, but can't smile. I did not like that one. She said, "It was ugly, just like you." I looked at her, then I looked at the phone in my hand, the screen still glowing with the evidence of my financial ruin. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a cable parting under too much tension. I looked at the shattered glass on the floor. I looked at the woman who hated me. "I am not cleaning that up," I whispered to the empty room. I walked back to the kitchen, the Zillow page still open on my laptop. I stared at the word sold. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was weak. They thought they could use me, discard me, and walk away with the fortune while I drowned in debt and dirty diapers. I picked up the phone again, but this time, I did not call Henry, and I did not call Mark. I opened the camera application. I switched it to video mode. I walked back into the living room, where Daisy was kicking the shards of glass across the floor. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "I am documenting." "Daisy," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I am just documenting. I recorded the mess. I recorded her screaming. I recorded the bruises on Thomas's arm that he had arrived with. Bruises I had noted but not photographed until now. Then I went to the basement, where I kept my old nursing scrubs. I dug through a box of old paperwork until I found what I was looking for. My old stethoscope, my badge, and a notepad. If they wanted a nurse, they were going to get one. But they were also going to get something they had not bargained for. I sat down at the kitchen table, pushed aside the foreclosure notice disguised as a bank statement, and began to write a new plan. The tears did not come. I was past tears. I was in the cold, clinical headspace of a triage nurse deciding who lives and who dies. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I had to do. The house was no longer a home. It was a containment zone. By the third week, the veneer of my suburban sanctuary had been completely stripped away, revealing the rotting drywall beneath. The silence that I used to find oppressive was now a luxury I could not afford. The air was thick with the sounds of a television blaring Fox News at maximum volume from the living room, Thomas's wet, rattling cough, and Daisy's ceaseless, muttering wonderings. I had become a ghost in my own life. I moved through the hallways with hollow eyes and a spine that felt like it was made of glass, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. It was Tuesday, just past 2 in the afternoon. I was on my hands and knees in the formal dining room, a room we used maybe twice a year for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Now, it was the site of a hazardous waste spill. Daisy had decided that the downstairs powder room was occupied by enemies, Russian spies, she claimed, and had relieved herself on my Persian rug. It was not an accident. I knew the difference between incontinence and malice. I had seen it in the eyes of patients who spit on nurses just to feel a modicum of control. Daisy had looked me dead in the eye as she squatted, a defiant smirk playing on her lips, daring me to stop her. I scrubbed at the wool fibers with a bristle brush, the chemical sting of enzymatic cleaner burning my nostrils. My hands were red and raw, the skin cracking around my knuckles. I am the maid, I whispered to myself, the rhythm of the scrubbing brush matching the chant in my head. I am the maid. I am the maid. Jade, Daisy's voice screeched from the kitchen. Jade, the soup is cold. You are trying to poison me with cold soup. I squeezed my eyes shut. A scream built in my throat. A hot, jagged thing that wanted to tear its way out. I swallowed it down. It tasted like bile. I stood up, my knees popping, and walked into the kitchen. Daisy was sitting at the island, banging her spoon against the granite. Thomas was in his wheelchair in the corner, staring blankly at the wall, drool pooling on his collar. It is gazpacho. Daisy, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It is supposed to be cold. She picked up the bowl and threw it. It hit the stainless steel refrigerator with a wet thud, splattering red soup across the pristine silver doors, dripping down onto the floor I had mopped an hour ago. You are useless, she hissed. Henry said you were useless. He said you only married Mark because you were drowning in student loans and needed a meal ticket. I froze. The accusation hit close to home, not because it was true about the student loans. I had paid those off years ago, but because of the secret I was currently keeping, the $11,000, the debt that kept me tethered to this nightmare. I did not clean up the soup. I stepped over the puddle of red liquid, walked past her, and went to the front door. I needed air. I needed to breathe something that did not smell of decay and cleaning fluid. I stood on the porch, inhaling the crisp autumn air. The neighborhood was quiet. Across the street, Mrs. Higgins was walking her golden retriever. She waved at me. I did not wave back. I could not let her see my face. I could not let her see the mask slipping. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Mark. Running late again. Big project at the warehouse. Do not wait up. I stared at the screen. A big project. Mark worked in logistics. November was a busy month. Yes, but Mark was not the type to work overtime unless he was forced. And right now, he was the boss's brother. I opened the Find My Friends application. We shared our locations for safety. A habit from when I worked late shifts at the hospital. Mark's dot was not at the warehouse. He was at the Rusty Anchor, a sports bar on the other side of town. And right next to his dot were two other familiar locations, tagged in a Facebook check-in I had seen earlier. Henry and Frank. They were celebrating. They were drinking beers, eating wings, and laughing. They were clinking glasses to the sale of the house, to the money sitting in their accounts, and to the free labor they had secured to deal with their parents. Mark was sitting there with them, spending money we did not have, while I was scrubbing urine out of a rug and dodging flying bowls of soup. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, replacing the anger. It was a dangerous kind of cold. It was the numbness that comes before frostbite sets in, when the nerves stop sending pain signals because the tissue is already dying. I went back inside. I cleaned the soup. I changed Thomas's diaper. Ignoring his grunt of discomfort, I gave Daisy her evening medication, watching like a hawk to make sure she swallowed it and did not hide it under her tongue. By the time Mark came home, it was past 11 at night. The house was dark, save for the nightlight in the hallway. I was sitting on the edge of the bathtub in the master bathroom. The door locked. I heard him stumble slightly on the stairs. He opened the bedroom door, trying to be quiet, but his coordination was off. "Jade," he whispered. "You awake?" I did not answer. He tried the bathroom handle. It was locked. "Babe, are you in there?" I stared at myself in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her skin was sallow, her eyes sunken with dark purple bruises underneath. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that had not been touched in 2 days. I looked down at the counter. Next to the sink was a bottle of Ambien, prescription strength. I picked up the bottle. The orange plastic felt warm in my palm. I could take 2. I would sleep for 12 hours. I would not hear Daisy screaming. I would not smell the house. I could take 10. I would sleep forever. The thought seduced me. It was a soft, velvet blanket offering to smother the noise. Mark knocked again, louder this time. "Jade, come on, open up. I brought you some takeout, leftovers from the Saoyuting Haoling. 2 hash is greater than from the office lunch. Saoyuting Haoling, 2A. Please." He smelled like stale India, pale ale, and buffalo sauce. The smell seeped under the crack of the door, invading my sanctuary. I gripped the pill bottle. My knuckles turned white. Why was I protecting him? Why was I protecting any of them? I was a nurse. My job was to save lives. But who was going to save mine? The realization washed over me. No one. No one was coming. The cavalry was not over the hill. The system was designed to crush people like me. The caregivers, the women, the silent laborers, the Henrys and Franks of the world won because they had no shame. Mark survived because he had no spine. And I was losing because I still had a conscience. I put the bottle down. I did not open it. Saoyuting Haoling, 2 hash is greater than not yet. I stood up and unlocked the door. Mark stumbled in, a goofy, lopsided grin on his face. "Hey, baby. Whoa, you look rough. Rough day at the office." "Huh?" He laughed at his own joke. He reached out to touch my arm, his hand clammy. I pulled away, my movement sharp and precise. "Go sleep in the guest room," I said. Mark blinked, confused. "What? Why?" "Because you smell like a bar, Mark. And because if you touch me right now, I might actually hurt you." His smile faltered. He looked at my eyes. And for a second, the fog of alcohol cleared enough for him to see something terrifying in them. He saw the predator waking up. "Okay," he muttered, backing away, hands raised in surrender. "Okay, geez. Mood swing much?" He left, closing the door behind him. I locked it again. I turned back to the mirror. I looked at the dark circles, the gray skin. I leaned in close, until my breath fogged the glass. "You are not a victim," I whispered to my reflection. "You are a trauma nurse. You deal with gunshot wounds and severed arteries. This is just another trauma. Stop bleeding. Assess the damage. Stop the threat." I reached into the pocket of my pajama pants and pulled out my phone. I opened the banking application again. The balance was still pitiful, but then I opened the voice memo application. I pressed play on the latest recording. Recording date, today, 2 in the afternoon. Daisy's voice crackled through the speaker. High and shrill. "Henry said you were useless. He said you only married Mark because you were drowning in student loans. Saoyu Ting Haling. R. Ting Hao Dayu. I listened to it again and again. Saoyu Ting Haling. 2 hash is greater than evidence. They thought I was spiraling. They thought I was breaking down. And I was falling apart. But even a broken glass can cut you if you step on it. I washed my face with freezing cold water. I brushed my teeth until my gums bled, scrubbing away the taste of the bile I had swallowed all day. I walked out of the bathroom and into the dark bedroom. I lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, fan slicing through the shadows. I would not sleep tonight. My mind was racing, connecting dots, formulating a strategy. The despair was fading, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. If they wanted to treat me like a servant, fine, but they forgot one thing about servants. We have the keys to every room in the house, and we know where all the bodies are buried. Saturday morning arrived with the oppressive weight of a gray wool blanket. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the backyard into a swamp and dampening the mood inside the house to a funeral dirge. I was in the basement, tasked with yet another degrading chore. Henry had dropped off 10 boxes of miscellaneous items from the parents' sold house, claiming he did not have time to sort through them. Just go through it. Jade, he had texted me. Keep what is important. Toss the junk. We trust your judgment. It was a lie. Of course, they did not trust my judgment. They just did not want to get their hands dirty with the dust of their own history. They wanted the money from the house, not the memories inside it. The basement smelled of mildew and unwashed laundry. I sliced through the packing tape of the 4th box with a box cutter, the sound ripping through the silence like a zipper opening a body bag. Inside were old clothes, moth-eaten sweaters, polyester ties from the 1980s, and a heavy, brown leather suitcase that looked like it had traveled the world and lost every battle along the way. I pulled the suitcase out. It was heavy, surprisingly so, for something that should have been empty. I unlatched the brass buckles, which snapped open with a rusty protest. The lining was a faded silk, stained with age. I ran my hand along the bottom, feeling for anything sharp before I tossed it into the donation pile. My fingers brushed against something hard, not the bottom of the suitcase, but something beneath the lining. Saoyu Ting Haling. 2 hash is greater than I paused. I pressed harder. There was a distinct crinkle of paper. I grabbed the box cutter with a surgical precision that my hands remembered from the emergency room. I sliced the silk lining open. Beneath the fabric lay a thick manila envelope and a black, leather-bound notebook. My heart did a strange double tap against my ribs. I sat back on my heels, the cold concrete floor seeping through my jeans. I looked up at the ceiling, half expecting Mark to come thumping down the stairs. But the house was silent. Daisy was napping, and Thomas was staring at the television upstairs. I opened the notebook first. It was a diary. The handwriting was shaky, the ink sporadic, but the dates were recent. The last entry was dated just 3 weeks before Thomas's stroke, June 12th. Henry came by today. He did not ask how I was feeling. He asked about the lake house. He asked if I had updated the will. I told him the market was down. He got angry. He kicked the dog on his way out. I saw it. He thinks I am blind, but I see everything. I turned the page. July 4th. Frank called. He needs $40,000. Gambling again. He says it is an investment. I told him no. He screamed at his mother. Daisy cried for 2 hours. I hate them. God forgive me. I hate what they have become. Vultures, waiting for the carcass to cool. My breath hitched. I had always thought Thomas was a passive, grumpy old man. I did not realize he was watching. I did not realize he was documenting. August 1st. Mark is a good boy, but he has no spine. He will let them pick his bones clean. I have to protect him. I have to protect the legacy. I cannot leave the money to them directly. Henry will spend it on cars. Frank will lose it at the casino. And Mark, Soyuting Ling, 2 hashes greater than Mark will just give it to them if they ask loud enough. I closed the diary, my hands trembling. This was not the rambling of a senile man. This was the testimony of a father who had realized his failure. I reached for the manila envelope. It was sealed with a heavy red wax stamp, something formal and archaic. I broke the seal. Inside was a legal document. The header was bold and unmistakable. The Thomas and Daisy Miller Irrevocable Living Trust. I scanned the pages, my eyes darting over the legalese. Assets, Soyuting Ling. 2. Beneficiarias, Soyuting Ling. Coxi, trustees, Soyuting Ling. R. Jinghao Dayu. And then I found it. Paragraph 14. The clause that would change everything. The caregiver clause. Upon the incapacitation of the grantors, the entirety of the trust assets, totaling $2,400,000, shall be managed by a designated trustee. However, the final distribution of the assets shall be determined by the primary physical caregiver of the grantors during the final 6 months of their lives. I read it again. The primary physical caregiver. It is the wish of the grantor that the individual who sacrifices their time, health, and home to provide comfort in our final days be the one to decide the fate of our estate. This individual shall have sole discretion to distribute funds to the children as they see fit, or to retain the funds for the continued care and maintenance of themselves and the estate. I sat there, frozen. $2.4 million. Henry and Frank had sold the house for $1 million and thought they had won the lottery. They had staged a coup, cashed out, and dumped the parents on me to save a few thousand a month. They thought they had extracted every ounce of value from Thomas and Daisy, but they did not know about the trust. They did not know that Thomas, in his final moments of clarity, had set a trap designed to catch the greedy and reward the faithful. I looked at the date on the document. It had been notarized 4 months ago. It was valid. It was active. And the lawyer named on the front page was a man named Samuel Roth, not the family attorney Henry used. This was a secret weapon. A cold, electric sensation spread through my veins. It started in my fingertips and washed over me, chasing away the fatigue, the depression, and the despair. I was not the servant. I was the judge. I was the jury. And I was the executioner. If I walked away now, if I divorced Mark and kicked them all out, Henry and Frank would eventually find this document. They would fight over who was the caregiver. They would destroy each other. But if I stayed, Soyuting Ling, or Jinghao Dayu, if I stayed, and if I documented every single diaper change, every single meal, every single doctor's visit, Soyuting Ling, 2 hashes greater than I became the primary caregiver. Legally, undeniably, I looked at the pile of old clothes in the box. I looked at the dark basement. I stood up, clutching the documents to my chest. I needed a safe place. I could not leave this in the house. Mark snooped. Daisy rummaged. I went to the unfinished part of the basement, where the insulation was exposed. I pulled back a piece of pink fiberglass insulation near the ceiling joists and shoved the envelope and the diary deep inside. Behind a wooden beam, I smoothed the insulation back, invisible. I walked back upstairs. The kitchen was bright, too bright. Mark was sitting at the table, eating a sandwich. He looked up, crumbs on his chin. Hey, you look, 小雨静好灵. 2 hash is greater than different, he said, squinting at me. You okay? Did you finish the boxes? I looked at my husband. I looked at the weak chin, the shifting eyes. I realized I did not hate him anymore. You do not hate a pawn on a chessboard. You just move it. I am fine. Mark, I said. My voice was calm, smooth, like the surface of a frozen lake. I was just thinking, 小雨静好灵. 2 hash is greater than maybe I have been too harsh. Mark stopped chewing. You have? Yes. I walked over to the sink and began to wash my hands, scrubbing away the basement dust. Your parents are family, Henry and Frank. 小雨静好灵. 2 hash is greater than they are just stressed. I should be more understanding. I am going to try harder. Mark's face lit up with relief. He stood up and hugged me from behind. Oh, babe, thank you. I knew you would come around. You are the best. Seriously, I will tell Henry you are on board. It will make Thanksgiving so much easier. I watched our reflection in the window above the sink. He was hugging a shark and he thought it was a dolphin. Yes, I said softly. Tell Henry I am on board. Tell him I am going to take such good care of them. I turned around and smiled. It was the best acting performance of my life. I am going to make them so comfortable, they will never want to leave. I walked into the living room where Thomas was slumped in his wheelchair. I knelt beside him. His eyes were glassy, staring at nothing. I took his hand. It was cold and dry like parchment paper. I found it. Thomas, I whispered, so low that only he could hear. I found the book. His eyes flickered. For a brief, terrifying second, the fog cleared. He looked at me. He squeezed my hand. A weak, barely there pressure, but I felt it. It was a handshake, a deal. The game had changed. The victim was gone. I stood up and smoothed my apron. Does anyone want tea? I asked the empty room. The hunt was on. The transformation of Jade Miller was not a miracle. It was a tactical realignment. For the next 3 weeks, I ceased to be a wife and became a construct. I was the perfect synthesis of Florence Nightingale and Martha Stewart, a creature designed to disarm, to serve, and document. I woke up at 5 in the morning every single day, while Mark snored beside me, his mouth open in a display of slack-jawed ignorance. I was already downstairs. I prepped meals that were rich in omega-3 fatty acids for Thomas's brain health and soft enough for Daisy's deteriorating chewing ability. I pureed organic spinach into smoothies. I baked bread from scratch, filling the house with the scent of yeast and warmth to mask the underlying odor of decay. The brothers, Henry and Frank, were suspicious at first. When they dropped by on a Sunday afternoon to check on their investment, they found me massaging Thomas's atrophied legs with lavender oil. Henry stood in the doorway, holding a bucket of fried chicken, looking confused. What is going on? He asked, gesturing to the scene with a greasy wing. I thought you were ready to quit last week. Now you are running a spa? I looked up, pushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear with a smile that I had practiced in the bathroom mirror. I realized you were right. Henry, I said softly, family is everything. And Thomas, 小雨静好灵, 2 hash is greater than he responds to touch. Look at his heart rate. I pointed to the portable monitor I had set up. It was steady, Henry scoffed, but his shoulders relaxed. He took a bite of the chicken. Well, good. Glad you finally got your head out of your ass. Jade, Mark said you were being difficult. I lowered my eyes, playing the role of the chastised woman. I was just stressed. I am sorry. I want to do right by them, Frank chimed in, laughing. See, I told you she would break. They always do. Just needed a little pressure. I did not flinch. I let them gloat. I let them think they had broken a wild horse. They had no idea they were riding a tiger that was just waiting for them to fall asleep, while they sat in the living room watching football, ignoring their mother who was sitting in the corner, staring at the wall. I went to the kitchen. I opened the application on my phone. Camera 1, living room. Camera 2, hallway. Camera 3, kitchen. I had spent $300 at a spy shop in Philadelphia. The cameras were the size of a pinhead, hidden inside smoke detectors and the hollow eyes of a decorative ceramic owl on the bookshelf. On the screen, I watched Henry wipe his greasy hands on my throw blanket. I watched Frank kick Thomas's wheelchair out of the way so he could see the television better. Hey, Dad, move over, Frank said on the screen, his voice tinny through the phone speaker. You are blocking the game. You are basically a vegetable anyway. You do not need to see the score. I hit the record button. Evidence item number 42. The tragedy of this situation was not that my in-laws were dying. Death is natural. As a nurse, I respected death. The tragedy was that they were dying surrounded by vultures who were already picking at the bones before the heart had stopped beating. But the real turning point, the moment the darkness truly settled over the house, came on a Thursday night. Mark came home late again. He was drunk, not stumbling drunk, but that dangerous, chatty kind of drunk where the filter dissolves. He walked into the kitchen where I was organizing Thomas's medication for the week. Hey, babe, he slurred, leaning against the counter. You are doing a great job. Really. Henry is impressed. I did not look up from the pill sorter. Plavix, lisinopril, atorvastatin. I am glad Henry approves. I said neutrally, yeah. Mark continued, grabbing a beer from the fridge. He says we are going to be rich. Jade, once the old man kicks the bucket, we get our cut, 40%. That is, Xiaoyizing Haoling. 2 hash is greater than, that is like 400,000, right? I paused. 400,000. That was the number Henry had promised. It was a lie. Of course. I knew about the trust now. I knew about the 2.4 million, but Mark did not. Mark, I said, turning to face him, do you ever think about them as people? Do you remember that Thomas taught you how to ride a bike? That Daisy used to make your costumes for Halloween? Mark frowned, looking annoyed that I was ruining his buzz. Do not start with the sentimental crap. Jade, they are gone. Look at them. Dad is a drooling mess, and Mom thinks the toaster is talking to her. It is over. We are just Xiaoyizing Haoling. 2 hash is greater than we are just waiting for the clock to run out. He took a long swig of beer. Besides, Henry says the market is shifting. We need that cash soon. If they hang on for another year, Xiaoyizing Haoling, 2 hash is greater than it is going to drain everything. It would be better for everyone if Xiaoyizing Haoling, 2 hash is greater than you know. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. If what? Mark? If nature just Xiaoyizing Haoling, 2 hash is greater than took its course a little faster. He said it. My husband, the man I had vowed to love and cherish. He was essentially wishing for his parents to die quickly so he could pay off his car note. I looked at the camera hidden in the smoke detector above his head. The tiny red light was invisible to the naked eye, but I knew it was there, blinking, recording. "Go to bed, Mark," I said. He shrugged and lumbered upstairs. 2 hours later, chaos erupted. I was in the guest room, reviewing the footage, when I heard a crash from the parents' room downstairs. I sprinted down the stairs, my nursing instincts taking over instantly. I burst into the room. Daisy was standing by the window, screaming. Thomas was on the floor. He had tried to get out of bed. He had fallen. "Thomas," I shouted, rushing to his side. He was conscious but groggy. His head had hit the nightstand. There was blood, a lot of blood. It pooled on the carpet, dark and viscous in the moonlight. I grabbed a towel and pressed it to the wound on his temple. "Apply pressure. Assess airway. Check pupils. Mark," I screamed. "Mark, get down here. Call 911. I heard Mark stirring upstairs. He took his time. When he finally appeared in the doorway, he was rubbing his eyes, annoyed. "What is it now?" he groaned. "Call 911. Your father fell. He is bleeding." Mark looked at the blood. He did not rush forward. He did not look horrified. He looked Yu Ting Haoling. Dose hesitant. He looked at his watch. "Jade, Yu Ting Haoling. 2# is greater than do we really need an ambulance?" Mark asked. I froze. My hands were slick with his father's blood. I looked up at my husband. "What did you say?" "If we call the ambulance, they will take him to the hospital," Mark said, his voice trembling slightly. "Then they might put him in a home. The doctors will see Yu Ting Haoling. 2# is greater than they might report us. And the bills, Jade. The deductible is $5,000. Henry said we need to keep expenses low." I stared at him. The man on the floor was bleeding out. He could have a subdural hematoma. He could die right here. And Mark was worried about the deductible. This was the tragedy. This was the absolute, utter moral bankruptcy of the man I had married. "Call the damn ambulance." "Mark," I roared, a sound so primal it hurt my throat. "Or I will tell the police you pushed him." Mark's face went pale. He scrambled for his phone. While he dialed, I leaned down close to Thomas. His eyes were open. He was looking at me. He was terrified, not of the fall, but of his son. "I got you, Thomas," I whispered. "I have you." The paramedics arrived 10 minutes later. I rode with them. Mark stayed behind, claiming he needed to watch Daisy, but I knew he just wanted to call Henry to do damage control. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor was a man I used to work with, Dr. Evans. He looked at me with sympathy. "Jade," he said, pulling me aside after stitching Thomas up. "He is stable, but I see signs of dehydration and some old bruising on his arms. Is everything okay at home?" This was the moment. I could report them now. I could end it, but if I reported them now, the state would take over. Adult Protective Services would step in. The trust would be frozen. The money would go to the state for their care in a facility. I needed to be the hero, not the whistleblower. Not yet. I looked Dr. Evans in the eye. "It is difficult, Doctor," I said, letting a tear slip down my cheek. "Mark's brothers, Yu Ting Haoling. 2# is greater than they are not helpful. I am doing everything alone. I am trying so hard." Dr. Evans patted my shoulder. "I know you are. Jade, you are the best nurse we ever had. If you need anything, let me know." I will make a note in the chart that you are the primary caregiver and that there are Saoyujingholing. 2# is greater than family tensions. Thank you, I said. When I brought Thomas home the next morning, Henry and Frank were waiting. What the hell happened? Henry demanded. Mark said you let him fall. I did not let him fall, I said, pushing the wheelchair past him. He tried to get up. Maybe if you guys ever visited to help with the night shift, you would know he gets restless. You need to be more careful. Frank snapped. If he dies from a fall, there is an investigation, an autopsy. It gets messy. We do not want messy. We want natural causes. I stopped. I turned around slowly. Natural causes. I repeated. Yes, Henry said, stepping closer, towering over me. Natural, peaceful, cheap. Do your job. Jade, keep him comfortable. Keep him quiet. And stop calling ambulances every time he gets a scratch. It eats into the profit. I looked at the camera hidden in the owl on the bookshelf behind Henry's head. I hoped the microphone picked that up. Understood. Henry, I said, I will do my job. That night, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water. The house was quiet again. I opened the trust document I had hidden in the basement, just to reassure myself. The primary physical caregiver, Saoyujingholing, 2# is greater than solely determines the distribution. I was not just earning my inheritance. I was earning my freedom, but as I looked at the bloodstain on the carpet that I still had not scrubbed out, I realized something else. I was beginning to enjoy the game. I was no longer just documenting their cruelty. I was orchestrating their downfall. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Mark, who was sleeping upstairs. We need to talk about funeral arrangements. Just in case, I knew he would show that text to Henry. I knew it would make them think I was on their side, preparing for the end they so desperately wanted. Let them think I was the angel of death. They would never suspect that I was actually the angel of justice. And my sword was getting sharper by the day. The trap was baited. The stage was set, and I was waiting in the wings, holding the match that would burn the entire production to the ground. It was Friday evening. The air outside was thick with the threat of a late November snowstorm. The sky, a bruised purple that promised violence. Inside, the house was warm. Too warm. I had turned the thermostat up to 78 degrees deliberately. Heat makes people irritable. It makes them sweat. It makes them make mistakes. I had sent the text message to Mark at 4 in the afternoon. His breathing is changing. Shane Stokes' respiration. It might be tonight. It was a lie. Thomas was stable. In fact, he was currently sitting in the living room watching a game show, happily eating a cup of vanilla pudding I had laced with a mild sedative to keep him calm. But the medical terminology was the hook. I knew Mark would forward it to Henry. I knew the brothers would panic. If Thomas died tonight, they needed to be here to secure the jewelry, the loose cash, and ensure I did not steal anything before the body was cold. They arrived at 6. I heard the car doors slam outside, aggressive and loud. There were 2 cars, Henry's leased Mercedes and Frank's beat-up Honda. I stood in the kitchen island, checking the camera feed on my phone one last time. Every angle was covered. The cloud storage was active. I slipped the phone into the front pocket of my apron, lens facing out. The front door burst open without a knock. Where is he? Henry demanded, storming into the hallway. He was wearing a camel hair coat that cost more than my first car, but his face was flushed, his eyes manic. Frank followed him, looking nervous, wringing his hands. Is it over? Did we miss it? Mark came in last, looking pale and terrified. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for reassurance, pleading for me to tell him that he would not have to deal with a corpse tonight. I walked out of the kitchen, wiping my hands on a towel. I moved slowly, deliberately. "He is resting," I said, my voice hushed. "His vitals are low, but he is still with us." Henry let out a breath that sounded like a curse. He pushed past me, marching into the living room. He looked at Thomas, who was dozing in the wheelchair. "He looks fine to me," Henry spat, turning back to glare at me. "You got us all the way out here for a nap? I canceled a dinner reservation for this." "Jade." I crossed my arms. "The breathing is irregular. Henry, it comes and goes. I am the nurse. I know the signs." Frank walked over to the mantelpiece and started picking up small porcelain figurines, turning them over to check the maker's marks. "We should start boxing this stuff up now," he muttered, "just in case. No point in waiting until the funeral home comes. It gets chaotic then." I watched them. They were not sons grieving a dying father. They were looters picking through the wreckage of a plane crash. Daisy shuffled into the room then. She was wearing her nightgown and holding a half-full glass of cranberry juice. Her hair was messy, standing up in tufts. She looked at the three men in her living room with confusion. "Who are you?" she asked, pointing a trembling finger at Henry. "Get out of my house." Henry rolled his eyes. "Oh, for God's sake, not today. Mom, we do not have time for the crazy act." Daisy stepped closer to him. She did not recognize her eldest son. She saw a stranger in a big coat shouting in her home. "I said get out," she shrieked, swinging her arm. The glass of cranberry juice flew from her hand. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. The red liquid arched through the air, a perfect crimson wave, and splashed directly onto Henry's camel hair coat. It soaked into the expensive fabric instantly, looking like a fresh arterial spray. The room went silent. Henry looked down at his coat. He looked at the red stains spreading across his chest. His face turned a color I had never seen before, a deep and violent plum. "You stupid old witch," Henry growled. "Sao yu tsing hao ling, 2 hash is greater than." He lunged. It happened fast, but I saw every frame. Henry stepped forward and shoved Daisy. It was not a gentle push. It was a shove meant to hurt. Daisy was frail. She weighed less than 100 pounds. She flew backward. Her slipper caught on the edge of the rug. She hit the floor hard. The sound was sickening, the thud of bone against hardwood, followed by a sharp crack as her hip hit the leg of the coffee table. Daisy screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pure agony. "Mom!" Mark yelled, but he did not move. He stood frozen, his hands covering his mouth. Henry stood over her, breathing heavily, his fists clenched. "Look what you did. Look at my coat. This is cashmere." I did not scream. I did not rush to comfort her immediately. I stepped into the center of the room. I positioned myself perfectly so that the camera on the bookshelf and the camera in my apron had a clear line of sight. "You just assaulted her," I said. My voice was ice cold. It cut through the panic in the room like a scalpel. Henry spun around to face me. "Shut up, Jade." She slipped. "You saw it." She slipped. "No," I said, stepping closer to him until I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You pushed her, and you are going to jail." Henry laughed. It was a jagged, nervous sound. "Jail? Please. Who is going to testify? My senile mother? My vegetable father? Or my brothers?" He looked at Mark and Frank. Tell her. Mark, tell her mom slipped. Mark looked at Henry. Then he looked at his mother, who was writhing on the floor, clutching her hip, sobbing. Then he looked at me. Mark, I said softly, look at me. If you lie for him now, you go down with him. This is elder abuse. It is a felony. Mark's lip trembled. He looked at Henry. I, Saoyu Jinghao Ling, 2 hash, is greater than I did not see anything. I was looking at my phone. Saoyu Jinghao Ling, 2 hash is greater than coward. Henry turned back to me, a sneer twisting his face. See, no witnesses, just your word against ours. And who are you? You are just the broke daughter-in-law living off our charity. Charity? I repeated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I held it up. The screen was glowing. I tapped the screen. Recording saved. I have cameras. Henry, I said. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he was about to faint. Saoyu Jinghao Ling, 2 hash is greater than what? I have cameras in the smoke detectors, in the bookshelf, in the kitchen. I have you pushing her in high definition. I have Frank talking about letting Dad die to save money. I have Mark admitting that you guys sold the parents' house and stole the proceeds. The silence that followed was heavy, pressurized. Frank stepped back, bumping into the wall. You, Saoyu Jinghao Ling, 2 hash is greater than you recorded us? Every word. I said. For 3 weeks, Henry's eyes darted around the room, looking for the cameras. Then his gaze locked onto my phone. Give me the phone, he said. His voice was low, dangerous. Saoyu Jinghao Ling, 2 cancelletto, è maggiore di no. Give me the damn phone. Jade, he lunged for me. I did not retreat. I was a trauma nurse. I had restrained meth addicts who were trying to bite my face off. Henry was just a soft businessman in a fancy coat. As he reached for me, I stepped to the side and brought my heel down hard on his instep. He howled in pain. I backed away toward the kitchen, keeping the island between us. I already uploaded it to the cloud. Henry, I shouted, it is gone. It is sent to my lawyer. You bitch, he screamed, limping toward me. You ungrateful little parasite. We gave you a roof over your head. You stole their house, I yelled back, letting the rage finally break through. You sold their home for $950,000 and gave me $2 grand to wipe their asses. You left them to rot. Mark's head snapped up. You, Saoyu Jinghao Ling, 2 hash is greater than you sold the house? Henry ignored him. He was focused on me. He grabbed a heavy crystal bowl from the dining table and hurled it at me. I ducked. The bowl shattered against the cabinets behind me, raining glass into the sink. That is assault with a deadly weapon, I said, breathless. Keep adding to the list. Henry. Frank grabbed Henry's arm. Henry. Stop. She has it recorded. Stop. Henry shook him off. I do not care. I am going to kill her. He rounded the island. I reached into the drawer I had left slightly open. I did not pull out a knife. I pulled out a canister of bear spray I had bought online. I raised the canister. One more step. Henry. He stopped. He looked at the orange canister. He looked at my eyes. He saw something there that terrified him. He saw that I wanted him to do it. I wanted him to come closer so I could hurt him. You would not dare. He sneered. Saoyu Jinghao Ling, 2 hash is greater than try me. Saoyu Jinghao Ling, 2 cardinal and Mallorca sirens. The sound was faint at first, then growing louder, piercing the winter night. Blue and red lights began to flash against the living room curtains, dancing across the walls like a disco for the damned. You called the cops? Mark whispered, horrified. I called them 10 minutes ago. I said, never lowering the canister. When you guys pulled into the driveway, I told them there was a domestic disturbance in progress and that I feared for the lives of 2 vulnerable adults. The front door, which I had unlocked before they arrived, swung open. Police, shouted a deep voice. 3 officers stormed in, hands on their holsters. They took in the scene instantly. Daisy on the floor crying, broken glass, Henry red-faced and aggressive. Me holding bear spray. Drop the spray. Ma'am, the officer commanded. I lowered it slowly and placed it on the counter. I raised my hands. Officer, I said, my voice shaking just the right amount to sound like a terrified victim. He pushed her. He pushed his mother. And he tried to attack me. Henry spun around. She is lying. She is crazy. She set us up. The lead officer looked at Daisy on the floor, unable to get up. He looked at the cameras I pointed out to him. Sir, put your hands behind your back, the officer said to Henry. No, Henry shouted. This is my house. Actually, I cut in, my voice clear and ringing. It is not. It belongs to Thomas and Daisy Miller, and I am their designated caregiver. You are trespassing. The officer grabbed Henry's wrist. He spun him around and slammed him against the wall. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Frank tried to edge toward the door. Him too, I said, pointing at Frank. He is an accessory. And him, I pointed at Mark. Mark looked at me, betrayal written all over his face. Jade? Baby? You watched him do it. Mark, I said coldly. You stood there and did nothing. The officers did not arrest Mark and Frank immediately, but they corralled them into the corner. Paramedics rushed in, a different crew this time, and began tending to Daisy. I walked over to the lead officer. I have video evidence of the assault, I said, and evidence of financial exploitation. I want to press charges. We will need to take a statement. Ma'am, the officer said, Xiao Yu Ting Hao Ling. 2# is greater than, of course. As they dragged Henry out, kicking and screaming about his cashmere coat, he locked eyes with me. You are dead. Jade, he screamed. You are dead. I stood in the doorway, the cold wind blowing my hair back. I watched them shove him into the back of the cruiser. I looked at Mark, who was sitting on the stairs, weeping into his hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me with a cold, hollow clarity. The house was a crime scene now. My marriage was over. My family was at war. But as I watched the ambulance load Daisy in, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I was not the servant anymore. I was the master of the house. And tomorrow, I would introduce them to the real weapon, the trust. I closed the front door, locking out the cold, and turned to face the wreckage of my life. I picked up the broom. There was a lot of glass to clean up, but for the first time in years, I did not mind the chores, because this time, I was cleaning house for me. The conference room of Roth, Sterling, and Associates smelled of lemon polish and old money. It was located in downtown Cherry Hill, a place where the carpets were thick enough to silence footsteps and the mahogany tables were wide enough to wage war across. I sat at the head of the table. To my right sat Mr. Samuel Roth, the attorney my father-in-law had secretly hired. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human greed and found it boring. Across from us sat the brothers. Henry was out on bail. He looked like a man who had not slept in 48 hours. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His tie was loose. And there was a dark, purpling bruise on his wrist where the handcuffs had pinched him. Frank sat next to him, chewing on a cuticle until it bled. Mark sat at the far end. I slumped over, refusing to look at me. This meeting is a formality, Henry rasped, his voice rough. Dad is in a coma. Mom is in rehab for a broken hip. As the eldest son, I have power of attorney. We do not need to be here listening to this. Xiaoyu Jinghaoling. Tuhash is greater than this usurper. He gestured a shaking hand toward me. Mr. Roth adjusted his glasses. He did not look at Henry. He looked at a file in front of him. Actually, Mr. Miller, that is incorrect. Your power of attorney was revoked 4 months ago. The silence that followed was absolute. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner sounded like a sledgehammer. Revoked? Frank squeaked. By who? Dad cannot even write his name. He could 4 months ago, Mr. Roth said calmly. And he did. He established the Thomas and Daisy Miller Irrevocable Living Trust. He placed all assets, including the portfolio you were unaware of, into this trust. Henry slammed his hand on the table. What portfolio? There is no portfolio. We sold the house. We have the cash. Mr. Roth opened the folder. He slid a piece of paper across the polished wood. The proceeds from the house sale are legally subject to the trust. As the property was listed as a trust asset, you sold it fraudulently, but we will deal with that criminal matter later. I am speaking of the investment accounts your father held. Total value, $2,400,000. The number hung in the air, 2.4 million. I watched their faces. It was like watching a building collapse. First came the shock, the widening of eyes. Then came the realization of what they had lost. And finally, the horror. Mark made a small, choking sound. 2 million? Dad had $2 million? And he let us struggle? He was saving it for his care, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was steady, authoritative, and he was saving it to protect himself from you. Henry looked at the paper, then at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. Fine. So there is a trust. We are the sons. We are the beneficiaries. Hand it over. Mr. Roth cleared his throat. He picked up the document I had found in the basement, the one I had risked everything to protect. Allow me to read the caregiver clause. Paragraph 14. He began to read. The words were dry, legal, and devastating. The distribution of assets shall be determined solely by the primary physical caregiver. Xiaoyu Jinghaoling. Tuhash is greater than proof of care must be documented. Xiaoyu Jinghaoling. 2. Logs, medical records, and physical presence. Mr. Roth looked up over his glasses. Jade Miller has provided me with 300 pages of daily logs. She has provided video evidence of her administering medication, cooking meals, and managing hygiene. She has provided affidavits from Dr. Evans at the hospital stating she was the sole advocate for the patients. He turned to Henry. You, on the other hand, Mr. Miller, have a restraining order against you for assaulting the beneficiary. And you, Mr. Frank Miller, are on record admitting to financial negligence. And you, Mr. Mark Miller, Xiao Jinghaoling, are Jinghao Dayu. Roth paused, looking at Mark with pity. You are absent from every single record. Therefore, Roth concluded, snapping the folder shut. Jade Miller is the designated trustee. She controls the money. She controls the care. She controls the allowance. Henry stood up so fast, his chair tipped over backward. You cannot do this, he screamed. She is a fraud. She is a gold digger. She planned this. Sit down. Henry, I said. I did not shout. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of a woman holding a loaded gun. Sit down. Henry looked at me. He looked at the lawyer. He looked at the security guard standing by the door. He sat. He pulled his chair up and collapsed into it, putting his head in his hands. I leaned forward. Here is how it is going to work. The money stays in the trust. It will be used to pay for the best care facility in the state for your parents. The Diamond Ridge estate. It costs $15,000 a month. They will have private nurses, physical therapy, and gourmet meals. They will live like royalty. And us? Frank whispered. What do we get? I smiled. It was a cold, sharp thing. You get nothing. Mark looked up, tears streaming down his face. Jade, Sauting Haling. 2 hash is greater than please. We are married. That is our money. I looked at my husband. I looked at the man who had hesitated to call an ambulance because of a deductible. We are married. Mark, but the trust is separate property. And as for our marriage, Sauting Haling, 2 hash is greater than. I think you will be hearing from my divorce attorney by Monday. The meeting ended 5 minutes later, but the punishment was just beginning. I walked out of the office and onto the busy street. The winter air bit at my cheeks, but I felt warm. I pulled out my phone. During the meeting, while they were arguing, I had forwarded a certain video file to the Neighborhood Homeowners Association Facebook group. I had also sent it to the prayer circle at Daisy's church. The caption was simple. Please pray for Daisy Miller, assaulted in her own home by her son. So sad to see a prominent local businessman treat his mother this way. By the time I got to my car, my phone was buzzing with notifications. The video of Henry shoving his mother was viral in our zip code. I drove past Henry's insurance office on the way home. There was already a news van parked outside. A local reporter was standing on the sidewalk, microphone in hand. I slowed down to watch. Henry's business partner was outside, tearing down a banner that had Henry's face on it. People were commenting on the social media page of his company, leaving 1-star reviews, calling him a monster, a coward, an elder abuser. In the suburbs, reputation is everything. You can be an alcoholic, you can be a cheater, but you cannot be the man who breaks his mother's hip for money. That is a sin that the country club does not forgive. I arrived back at the house. It was empty now. Daisy was in the hospital. Thomas was with her. The brothers were in ruins. I walked into the kitchen. Mark was there. He had beaten me home. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He looked up when I entered. His eyes were red, swollen. Jade. He choked out. I lost my job. I put my keys on the counter. Oh? My boss saw the video. Everyone saw the video. He said he cannot have someone like me on the team. He said I am a liability. I opened the fridge and took out a bottle of sparkling water. That is unfortunate. Unfortunate? Mark stood up, his voice rising in hysteria. Jade, my life is over. Henry is going to prison. Frank is going to be sued. I have no job, no money, and you are kicking me out. I took a sip of the water. The bubbles burned pleasantly in my throat. You should have thought about that before you sold your parents' house out from under them. Mark, you should have thought about that before you treated me like a servant in my own home. I walked over to the back door and opened it. The movers will be here tomorrow to pack your things. I said, you can sleep in the guest room tonight, but do not touch me, and do not talk to me. Mark stared at me. He looked like he was looking at an alien. Who are you? He whispered. I am the woman who cleaned up your mess. I said, and now I am taking out the trash. I walked out onto the patio, leaving him alone in the kitchen. My phone pinged again. It was a text from Mrs. Higgins across the street. Jade. Honey, we saw the news. We are so sorry. If you need anything, the whole neighborhood is here for you. You are a saint for putting up with that family. Sao Ting Haling. Deux dièse est supérieur à saint. I looked at the gray sky. I was not a saint. I was a survivor. And as I looked at the notifications rolling in, the community rallying behind the brave nurse, the condemnation of the cruel sons, I realized something. I had won the court of law, and I had won the court of public opinion. There was no appeal for them. There was no redemption. They were branded, and I was the one holding the branding iron. The sound of a marriage ending is not a scream or a plate shattering against a wall. It is the sound of duct tape ripping off a roll. Zip, snap. I stood in the foyer, my arms crossed, watching Mark seal the last cardboard box. He had packed his life into 6 boxes. That was all he amounted to after 5 years. 6 boxes of clothes, a few participation trophies from a softball league he played in 3 years ago, and a collection of shot glasses. He tried to take the 65-inch television from the living room. The sheriff deputy standing by the door, a large man named Officer Miller, no relation, thankfully, had stepped forward and shook his head. That is property of the Miller Trust. I had said, my voice devoid of any warmth, you did not pay for it. Mark, the joint account paid for it. And since you drained the joint account to help your brother commit fraud, the trust claims it as restitution. Mark had just slumped his shoulders and walked away. Now, he stood at the door, holding a box of shoes. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with the red irritation of a hangover that had lasted 3 days. He looked like a dog that had been kicked by its master and still did not understand why. Jade, he whispered, I really did love you. I looked at him. I searched my heart for a flicker of emotion. I looked for pity, for anger, for love. I found nothing. It was like looking into an empty room where the furniture had been repossessed. You loved the convenience of me. Mark, I said, you loved that I cooked. You loved that I cleaned. You loved that I fixed your family messes. But you never loved me enough to protect me from them. He opened his mouth to argue, but the sheriff cleared his throat. It was a subtle, low sound, but it carried the weight of the law. Time to go. So, the officer said. Mark walked out into the gray December afternoon. He loaded his boxes into his sedan, the car that was 3 payments behind because he had prioritized Henry's demands over our bills. I watched him drive away. I watched the taillights fade until they turned the corner at the end of the subdivision. Then, I closed the front door. I locked the deadbolt. I engaged the chain. The silence that followed was heavy. It pressed against my eardrums. For weeks, this house had been filled with noise. Daisy's screaming, Thomas's coughing, the brothers' loud, arrogant posturing, Mark's whining. Now, there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. I walked into the kitchen. I sat down at the island, the same place where Henry had demanded I become a servant. I pulled out my phone. I opened my banking application. The balance was no longer red. As the trustee, I had authorized a reimbursement to myself for caregiver expenses and back pay. It was a legitimate transaction, approved by Mr. Roth. I opened my credit card application. The number 11,000 stared back at me. It was the chain that had bound me to this nightmare. I tapped, pay full balance. Xiaoting Haoling. 2# is greater than submit. Payment successful. I stared at the green check mark. I should have felt elated. I should have popped a bottle of champagne and danced on the table. Instead, I felt a wave of exhaustion so profound it nearly knocked me off the stool. I put my head down on the cool granite. I was free of debt. I was free of my toxic in-laws. I was free of a weak husband, but I was also alone in a 4-bedroom house that did not belong to me. I was the steward of a fortune, living in a museum of someone else's life. Later that afternoon, I drove to the Diamond Ridge estate. It was the most expensive assisted living facility in the state. The driveway was lined with manicured boxwoods. The lobby smelled of fresh lilies and expensive coffee, not urine and bleach. I walked to the reception desk. The woman behind the counter smiled at me. She knew who I was. I was the woman who paid the $15,000 monthly invoice. Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller, she chirped. Your in-laws are in the solarium. I walked through the carpeted hallways. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. I found them by the window, overlooking a garden covered in a light dusting of frost. Thomas was in a motorized wheelchair that cost more than my first car. He was asleep, his head lolling to the side, a blanket tucked securely around his legs. Daisy was sitting next to him in a plush armchair. She was staring out the window. Her hair was clean and styled. She was wearing a cashmere cardigan that I had bought for her with the trust money, a replacement for the dignity her son had tried to strip away. I pulled up a chair and sat beside her. Daisy? I said softly. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were cloudy. The rage that had defined her for the last month seemed to have been medicated away. She looked at me. She studied my face. For a moment, I braced myself for an insult. I waited for her to call me trash, or a gold digger, or a servant. Instead, she smiled. A small, confused, polite smile. Hello, dear, she said. Are you the new nurse? Xiaoting Haoling. Zwei Rautest grosser als I froze. She did not know me. The woman who had tormented me for 5 years, who had called me names at my own wedding, who had made my life a living hell. Xiaoting Haoling. 2# is greater than she was gone. The dementia had wiped the slate clean. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was not sadness for her. It was a strange, jagged grief for myself. I had fought a war against a ghost. I had destroyed my marriage, sent a man to jail, and hardened my heart into stone to defeat an enemy who no longer even remembered the battle. No, Daisy, I whispered. I am not the nurse. She patted my hand. Her skin was paper thin. Well, you have kind eyes. You look like someone who takes charge. I looked down at her hand covering mine. I took charge. All right, I stayed with them for an hour. I fed Thomas his dinner when he woke up. I wiped his chin. I fixed Daisy's blanket. I did the work of a daughter, but I felt like a mechanic maintaining an expensive engine. When I left, the sun was setting. The sky was a bruised purple, bleeding into black. I drove back to the empty house. I poured a glass of red wine. I sat in the living room. In the dark, the house was mine. The money was under my control. The enemies were vanquished. But as I looked at the spot on the rug where Daisy had fallen, the spot I had scrubbed clean but still saw in my nightmares, I realized the cost of victory. I had proven I was not a servant. I had proven I was the master. But looking at my reflection in the dark window, I did not see a hero. I saw a woman who had learned how to use people's weaknesses against them. I saw a woman who had learned to record, to document, to entrap. and to destroy. I had survived, but the Jade who used to cry over a sad movie, the Jade who wanted to save lives in the emergency room because she believed in humanity. Xiao Jinghaoling, 2# is greater than she was gone. She had died in this house, somewhere between the diaper changes and the lawyer meetings. I took a sip of wine. It tasted like iron. I was safe. I was secure. And I had never been more terrified of myself. The first snow of the season finally fell in late December. It covered the suburban lawns of Cherry Hill in a pristine white sheet, hiding the dead grass and the cracks in the driveways. It made everything look pure, clean, and innocent. I knew better. I stood at the window of the master bedroom, holding a mug of steaming black coffee. It was 8 in the morning on a Tuesday. Normally, I would be rushing to check Daisy's blood pressure or change Thomas's sheets. Today, the only thing on my schedule was a meeting with my financial advisor. The divorce had been finalized yesterday. It was a default judgment. Mark had not even shown up to the hearing. He could not afford a lawyer, and he was too ashamed to represent himself. The judge had granted me everything I asked for, which, ironically, was nothing from Mark. I did not want his debt. I did not want his used car. I just wanted his name off my driver's license. I was Jade Vance again. A car pulled up to the curb outside the gate. It was a Honda Civic, rusted around the wheel wells. I squinted. It was Frank. He did not get out. He just sat there, idling, staring at the house. He looked older. He looked tired. I knew why he was there. Henry had been sentenced last week, 2 years in state prison for elder abuse and assault. Frank had escaped jail time by turning state's witness against his brother regarding the fraudulent house sale. But he was financially ruined. The civil lawsuits had stripped him of his condo, his savings, and his dignity. He was probably hoping I would come out. Maybe he thought he could appeal to my family values one last time. Maybe he wanted to beg for a loan from the trust. I took a sip of coffee and watched him. I could go out there. I could give him a few $1,000s. It would be a drop in the bucket of the trust fund. It would be the Christian thing to do. I turned away from the window. I did not go out. I walked into the walk-in closet. It used to be filled with Mark's cheap suits and polo shirts. Now, it was empty. On one side, on my side, I had started to fill the space with new things. Cashmere sweaters, tailored blazers, shoes that cost more than a mortgage payment. I was not spending the trust money on frivolous luxury. The terms of the trust allowed for reasonable living expenses for the trustee, and I had decided that looking the part of a powerful woman was a reasonable expense. I dressed slowly. Black trousers, a silk blouse, the uniform of a woman who answers to no one. I drove to the cemetery before my meeting. I was not visiting a grave. I was visiting a plot. The plot I had purchased for Thomas and Daisy. It was in the premium section, under a large oak tree, overlooking the lake. It was peaceful. It was expensive. I stood there in the snow, looking at the empty grass. They were still alive, comfortably numb in their 5-star facility. But in a way, they were already gone. The people they used to be, the parents who raised 3 sons, the couple who built a life, had been erased by disease and betrayal. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text from Dr. Evans at the hospital. "Hey Jade, we have an opening for a case manager in the emergency room. No night shifts, administrative mostly. I know you said you were done with nursing, but Xiao Jinghaoling, 2# is greater than we could use someone tough like you. someone who knows how to handle difficult families. I stared at the screen. Case manager, the person who navigates the bureaucracy, the person who fights with insurance companies, the person who protects patients from the system, and sometimes from their own families. It was not bedside nursing. It was not saving lives with CPR. It was saving lives with paperwork. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one in months. I typed back, "I am interested. When can I interview?" I put the phone away. The wind picked up, biting at my face, but I did not shiver. I had walked into this fire as a victim. I had been burned. It scared and reshaped. I was not the soft, eager to please girl who wanted everyone to like her. I was the villain in Henry's story. I was the cold-hearted ex-wife in Mark's story. I was the thief in Frank's story. But in my story, I was the one who was left standing. I walked back to my car, my boots crunching in the snow. I had a meeting to attend. I had a trust to manage. And now, I had a job interview to prepare for. The rearview mirror caught my reflection as I adjusted it. My eyes were clear. My jaw was set. I started the engine. The heater blasted warm air, defrosting the windshield. The past was a closed account. The future was an open checkbook, and I was the only one with the pen.